morning, everyone. Pastor George here with our episode of A New Thing, and I thought today that I would educate all of you because my role is not just to help you to understand the Bible more, but my role is also to really make you a better person overall as well, and to really expand your horizons because really our educational system in the United States has failed to do that in most places. And so today, we're going to be looking at something a little bit different. We're going to be looking at the two books that have influenced a view of the Bible or a view of other people or characters in the Bible than any others that have existed. And so we're going to be looking at two of these books today. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is because of this image that I found, or I was scrolling. I thought it was funny yesterday, but then it kind of got me thinking. So I'll bring it up in a second. So this is it. This is the 9 levels of hell. And I've got this from Adult Swim. Adult Swim, for anyone who doesn't know, is a programming block on Cartoon Network, but it's like the nighttime one, so it's not for kids. But they have a lot of stuff aimed for adults, young adults especially, college age, kids and up type of thing. And I watched a lot of Adult Swim when I was like in late high school and kind of until now. I mean, I don't really watch TV that much anymore, but I still like a lot of the Adult Swim shows and things like that. But here, right, you have this 9 levels of hell thing, and it uses basically these different groups, and it goes from weebs all the way down to Sonic fans. I'm not going to tell you what any of these things are. If you want to know what a brony is, I'm going to let you go down that rabbit hole yourself. But I thought that this was really funny, but it made me think about how this type of language is stuff that we just use all the time, and we don't really think about it, right? We don't really be like, okay, where do we get this idea from? Because a lot of people, when you talk about hell, will act as though this is what hell is like, right? There's levels of hell, and that has very certain image, like even the idea of fire and stuff like that, right? And so the first person that we're going to talk about is this guy right here. We're going to talk about Dante Alighieri. Dante Alighieri was a poet from Tuscany, Florence, I believe. And this is a depiction of him on a fresco or whatever. And you can see here he's standing and he's wearing these. This is like the robes of a poet. He lived in the 1300s, in the Middle Ages, so kind of near the end of the Middle Ages. And in his hands, he's holding the Divine Comedy. And he is gesturing towards kind of 2 different areas. You notice like there's a bunch of demons and stuff on the other side, kind of going downward. And then behind him, there's this little pillar of stuff going up. So to the place with the demons, that's the Inferno, so that's hell. And the place behind him is Purgatory. And then above him, you can see kind of the different layers of the sky with different bodies and stars and stuff like that. That leads up to where heaven is, right? So you kind of have all that there. And this is like Dante is the one who's created this idea. There's not this idea that there's levels of hell in the Bible, right? This is a metaphorical thing that Dante creates in his book in his poem. And we're actually going to be looking at 2 poems today, even though they're studied as books, 2 really long poems, in order to talk about the soul's journey to God. That's kind of the overall point of the Divine Comedy. It's called a comedy, not because it's funny, but because it has a happy ending. At least that's one of the explanations. The idea of a comedy primarily having to make us laugh is a more modern idea or understanding of what that word means. There are kind of funny satirical parts to it. Basically, Dante uses this as a self-insert. So what that means in literature is he himself is literally a character in it, and he's led by Virgil, who's a Roman poet, through the circles of hell, which is the most famous part of the book, is that part, although it's 3 parts. And then in Purgatory, I believe he's also led by Virgil for some of that, but then Beatrice, who's like his muse, this girl that he likes that he can never have, who we also, by we, I mean scholars who also think existed. And then when he's in heaven, kind of near the end, he's led by Bernard of Clairvaux, who is a Christian mystic. But so he is a character. And to be fair to him, he doesn't depict himself as like super awesome. He faints a bunch of times because he's scared, things like that. But he inserts himself into the story, and he's led through all of these different circles. And there he uses these, especially the circles of hell, to get at his enemies. And so he'll be like, and then I saw this person there. And so there are funny parts about that if you think about that in a comedic or a political sense, because Dante was also kind of a politician, and so is the other guy we're going to talk about. But anyway, so that's this, right? But like, he is so influential in our society, we don't usually think about him, that we can get stuff like this and not think anything of it. Even more so, people will just believe that there are levels to this sorts of thing, even though that's completely absent from the biblical text. Now, of course, is Dante the first one to say hell is like fiery or whatever? No, he's drawing on a lot of biblical imagery and, of course, popular belief at his time, which was all obsessed with a lot of this sort of stuff. But he adds a little bit more to it, and he uses it as a way to talk mostly about the Christian's journey towards heaven. And of course, this is a really good example of what this looks like, right? So it's hard to show you, but if you want to look at it like this, let me make sure my face isn't in the way. Good, it's not. So if you look at this, right, you'll see that there's this white thing at the bottom. That's hell, and it goes downward. It's like, so if you were to flip this, it would look like it's going up, but it's going down, right? And it goes down into the inferno, and that's where Satan is at the very bottom. And then you have our world, which is, in the middle here. And then when we die, we go into purgatory. Of course, this is Dante's like Catholic or Latin, I should say at this time. There isn't really Catholic yet. So Latin Christian belief in purgatory, which was pretty popular at the time. And so they move up in purgatory here. They get to the terrestrial paradise, which is the Garden of Eden. And then you jump past all the stars and you go to heaven, right? And then you move up the layers of heaven there. Now, of course, this isn't Dante is not saying, even in this, he's not saying this is how it is, right? That's not not how it's supposed to be, right? He's using all this very metaphorically and stuff like that, but it becomes so popular that it's something I like to call Christian mythology. And when people say that, they might mean like, oh, like the Christian religion is mythology. No, when I talk about Christian mythology, I talk about like all the stuff that has been added on, like demons' names and the layers of hell or the layers of heaven, or this idea, all these different ideas that we might have about like the way that certain things work that are not in the Bible, right? They're later stories that people made to kind of round things out or to talk about things without in different ways without having to make explicit reference to the scripture. And so this is Christian mythology. In fact, both of what we're going to look at today is Christian mythology. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that the thing you worry about, this is with all art, right, is that if you make something based on the Bible, that it actually exceeds because of its fame or surpasses actual understanding, right? Which neither of these guys intended to do, but it's just really interesting, about that sort of thing, right? Like, I'm really interested to see now. Of course, like, I know that we have people who like The Chosen here, so I'm not bashing it, but like The Chosen is not at the level of like the Divine Comedy or the other thing we're going to be looking at, but it still is very influential in the sense that like it's the way that we interact with things visually helps our minds, like it sets kind of how it looks, right? So there's lots of people, I imagine, who might not pick up a Bible but will watch The Chosen and think that that's how it all went down, or that's what the Bible says, even though it doesn't, right? And so there you kind of see how this can be a little dangerous. But anyway, just to show the impact of this, right? I have a quote from Dante. This is a famous one. This is near the beginning, and this is when he is going into hell. And so there's this gate that he and Virgil are going to pass through. And so this is what it says. It says, "Through me you pass into the city of woe. Through me you pass into eternal pain. Through me among the people lost for justice the founder of my fabric moved. To rear me was the task of power divine, supremest wisdom in primeval lore. Before me, things create were none, save things eternal, and eternal I shall endure. All hope abandon, ye who enter here. Right, so there's that famous line, abandon all. Usually, the way it's said in English is abandon all hope, ye who enter here. Um, and so this is from this translation of Dante, because it was written in Italian, which is also really important. He's kind of seen as the first modern writer, in that he's writing in the not in Latin, but he's writing in his spoken language, which was like late medieval Italian. And so this is really the first wave of the Renaissance, of what we call the Renaissance. Obviously, they wouldn't call it that, and it's gonna keep building and building. But anyway, very important guy, very important book, especially important on the way we think about things. And of course, we have this very famous illustration of Satan. So the way that all the realms are divided is there's 9 circles plus 1. So in hell there's 9, and then there's 1 at the very bottom, and that's where Satan is, and he's kind of in this icy cavern, locked away, and he's down there and he's chewing. He has like these 3 heads, or sometimes it's very revelationist almost in its images, where it's like very steeped in metaphor and odd. And he's either has 3 mouths or 3 heads, I can't remember. The point is he's chewing on these different traitors, and I always forget the one guy, but the other 2 are Brutus, who betrayed Julius Caesar, and Judas, who betrayed Jesus, and he's constantly chewing on them, right, keeping them in eternal torment, because the Dante betrayal, right, the idea of Satan is being particularly influential on betrayal, Judas betraying Jesus, things like that. That is the worst thing that you can possibly try to do, right? Betrayal against God. And so Satan personally punishes those people in hell. So, and here you can see that Virgil and Dante are kind of these 2 little guys standing up there, and they're looking down, and they see Satan down there chewing on the traitors. All right, so that's first thing I wanted to talk about. This is a portrait or painting by Gustave Doré, who basically was a French guy, and he did a bunch of illustrations of various different books and things like that. And we're going to look at another one of that. But he also did the Bible. Lots of his Bible ones are pretty famous. So this is one that I think is really interesting, which is how, why, and when did Satan fall from heaven? And this is Got Questions, which is not always the best place to go for answers to the Bible, but I figured this is actually a really good place to start, because if you type in something like a question on Google, chances are Got Questions is going to be one of the first things that pops up. So we have here a question, right, which is this idea of Satan's fall from heaven. It's like, oh, okay, right, like how do we think about this? Because this idea of Satan falling from heaven is a very common and understood one, right? So if you were to go around and you were to ask people who, like, hey, what is Satan? They'll say, oh, Satan's a fallen angel. He's a fallen angel, right? He served God. He was God's favorite angel, and he fell from heaven. He fell from heaven because he tried to take God's place, right? That's what people will tell you. Now, is that in the Bible? No. The closest you get is here in Luke 10:18, when Jesus says, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. I've given you authority to trample on snakes and scorpions and to overcome all the power of the enemy. Nothing will harm you. However, do not rejoice that the spirits submit to you, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven. So Jesus has sent out his disciples. They're all stoked because they can cast out demons. And then they come back, and this is what he says to them. This is the only reference we have to Satan falling from heaven. Now, the idea here is what's going on, and when does that happen? Because if we are to think about this literally, right, Satan is present in Job, right? That's actually the first time he's called Satan. A lot of people will read the serpent, which I don't think is wrong, in the Genesis story as Satan, but he's not named as Satan there, right? The only first time that Satan is actually named is in the book of Job. Satan means the accuser, So he's the one who finds fault, the one who tries to pull people away from the presence of God, right? And so here, Jesus points out that Satan has fallen from heaven, and really, what lots of translators will look at this is some people will say, well, this isn't even, or theologians, right? This isn't even talking about a literal event. This is more Jesus talking about how Satan is the king of this world, right? The prince of this world. And so the differences here is between Jesus Christ defeating him, which is ultimately happens on the cross, and the idea that heaven is, that the world is ruled over by him. Now, even if, like, it's completely metaphorical and it's not describing something that literally happened, even if it's something that literally happened, right, it has none of the hallmarks of what we think, right? That he's like this super special person, super special angel that tried to take God's place and was thrown down, right? No, that not exist. Now, you'll see here, they'll say Satan's fall from heaven is symbolically described in Isaiah 14, 12 through 14, and Ezekiel 28, 12 through 18. So I have those up here, right? What was it? Well, we're gonna look at. I'm gonna start it a little bit before, so you can see why I don't find this very compelling. And here they continue to say, while these two passages are referring specifically to the kings of Babylon and Tyre, we believe they also reference the spiritual power behind those kings, namely Satan. Now, I don't think they do a good job at all of backing that up here. I think that this is just presumption, and this comes from a lot of lines of Christians just thinking this or making this connection. And I'm actually going to show you in a really interesting way how this connection was made. But here we see in Isaiah, God is giving different oracles against different kings, and this is what he tells them. So in verse 4, he says, you will take up this taunt against the king of Babylon. And this whole thing is about how the king of Babylon is going to be defeated, all that sort of stuff. And then you get to verse 12, where it says, how you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to earth, you who once laid low the nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mounts of assembly, on the utmost heights of Mount Zaphon. And so this here is describing the attitude of the king, and people will go, well, actually, this is really talking about Satan. No, it's not, right? There's no reason to think that, right? Because then we have to assume that, the prophecy against the Philistines is doing the exact same thing. Really what this is people, I think, reading back into the text, like the popular belief, and justifying it. So let me tell you how this works really well. So we're going to look at the King James version of this, and you're going to see this happen. Now, this isn't the fault of the King James translators. Let me be very clear. This is people, again, misunderstanding what this is. All right, so 12. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations, right? So we go, Lucifer. Oh, Lucifer is Satan's name. Again, nowhere is that said in the Bible. This comes from this passage, this idea that Lucifer is being, that one, this is talking about Satan. It's not. Two, that Lucifer is his name. Lucifer is the name of a star, okay? It's the name of the morning star. That's like its official name. And so here, right, in the King James Bible, they're using Lucifer as a way that people who are reading the book at the time would understand what they're talking about. Oh, the morning star. Just like we have here in the NIV, son of the dawn, right? Morning star, son of the dawn. So we understand that, what it's talking about, right? They don't translate it as Lucifer specifically because it will confuse people, and it's not, right? Like, so I'll give you another example of this, right? So another star's name is Beetlejuice. Now, when we think of Beetlejuice, we think of that movie or whatever. At least that's what I think of. But this is the actual name of the star is Beetlejuice, which is what he's named after. So if it said Beetlejuice, we'd all think, oh man, it must be talking about the movie. No, right? It's talking about a star in the time period. So anyway, pretty good example of that. So Isaiah, and then we have Ezekiel. So this is the other verse that they mentioned, and you'll see here it says, "Son of man, take up lament concerning the king of Tyre," and then go into it. And the verses they specifically point to are 12 through 18. So like this whole thing talks about how Tyre was very amazing and had a lot of splendor. It was a very wealthy city. It was a merchant city, and they say that this refers to Satan. Again, it doesn't. You'll see other language here. Like you'll see there's a prophecy against Sidon right there, right? So this is all just stuff that people have taken and then read back. Sometimes this has been in the church for a very long time, right? It's not just something that's happened normally. A lot of people, especially in certain areas of church, would really read a lot of this stuff metaphorically, and they would just read in meanings to it without really a care for the context. And then that ends up becoming very popular and is just spread around, sort of thing. All right. So all of this leads us to where we get this and where this is most powerfully seen in our culture, which is in this poem, an epic long poem by John Milton called Paradise Lost. So Paradise Lost is all about how Satan falls from heaven after trying to take the throne and how he turns humanity towards sin. That's what Paradise Lost is all about. He came out with a second poem, which is not as well known, called Paradise Regained, which is about Jesus's work and how he brings us back to paradise and stuff like that. But Paradise Lost is the most famous poem by Milton and been incredibly influential, especially because it draws together all these different ideas and brings it into the person of Satan, right? I'm fairly certain, like, this is a cover of a this is also Doors, so the same guy who did this one, right? He did this. He'd also illustrated Paradise Lost he's in 1800, so he's living way after Dante and Milton. Milton was in the 1600s, but he's illustrating them, and so he's very famous for that. But I think this is on the cover of a Led Zeppelin album, if I remember correctly. But anyway, we have here we have Satan kind of doing his lament or whatever, which is a very famous part of Milton's Paradise Lost. And so Milton like really turns Satan into a character to kind of show the pride of people and how we kind of end up where we're at, right? One of the things that Milton is really is big on is a lot of people, right? Like I did that story about like the Church of Satan and the video on the Church of Satan and stuff like that, and they're all about like questioning, and we use Satan as our model of the ultimate skeptic and the one it's like all of that comes from Milton. None of that is in the Bible, right? So the portrait of Satan that Milton gives us is the one that has really caught on in our culture, right? Milton wrote in English. He's a very important poet in English. It used to be required reading in schools, right? Like, so very influential. Milton is up there. He's like the big three of English poetry, right? You have Shakespeare, obviously. You have Chaucer, who did the Canterbury Tales, and then you have Milton. Those are kind of the big three that you used to have to study all the time. Now, people don't do that anymore, which is a shame, but I'm not even the biggest fan of Paradise Lost. It's just so important that we probably should read it at least once in your life. But here we have Satan going through this, right? And we have quotes that kind of show what Milton is getting at here. So this is all said by Satan, right? He says it's better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. Maybe you've heard that before. Or this is another great one. The mind is its own place and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven, right? And now there's irony in this because Satan is saying all these things. He's talking about how awesome he is and how free thinking he is, all these other types of things, but he's stuck in hell, right? There's that's the irony of a lot of this which is going on, because it's all about like, oh, I'm my own man, I'm awesome, I'm better than God. It's like, well, no, you're not. You're stuck in hell, right? You lose. So I just find that so interesting. And this has also, though, been really impactful because of Milton's influence. A lot of people just assume, Catholic, Protestant, Milton was a Puritan, really. So, like, a lot of people just assume that this is what happened, right? It's not. not in the Bible, unless you look really, really hard, right? And really, really metaphorically, you're not going to find any of this talked about. But you are going to find it in Milton, and Milton's influence has been so important that people believe that Satan is a fallen best archangel or whatever. You were the chosen one type of thing. No, that's not at all. That's not even in Milton's poem, but like that's basically the way that people think about Satan, which is just non-existent. And so here's my upshot of all this: is one, these books are great. It's good to do this sort of stuff, right? Because what this does is it makes the faith fresh to the people you're living in at the time. So I'm not against that. It's just that as Christians, it's really important for us to be, I believe, to be guardians of the canon. And what that means, this is probably going to be part of my doctoral work, but basically that we are one of the few places in our culture where actively teaching old stuff is encouraged and it's good, right? And that it can be helpful. Like a lot of places, schools and things like that will take a negative view of this, try and get rid of old stuff and put new stuff in for all sorts of different reasons. But one of the powerful things that the church can do is it can say, actually, these stories are really good, and they can teach us things that are important, and it gives us ideas of how we can communicate it as storytellers today to our culture. But at the same time, we have to be very clear about what we are adding and what's in the actual text. And this is important, especially when it comes to like apologetics or talking to people about the faith, because there's lots of preconceptions that people have, usually based on popular culture, that we can correct and show that actually there's a lot more goodness or better understanding here in the Bible than in these other things. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. I'm glad you guys learned so much about literature. Keep up the good work. I'll see you guys on Sunday for worship. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Thursday. Peace out.